The sun was setting over the kingdom of Elaria, casting long golden rays through the dense thornwood forest. The roses that bloomed in the trees were as beautiful as they were deadly, their thorns sharp enough to pierce armor. In a small clearing, Prince Evander stood tall, his golden hair catching the last light of the day. He gazed across the horizon, his piercing blue eyes filled with thoughts of a kingdom that bore heavy burdens. He was the crown prince, heir to a throne that ruled over both the beauty and the cruelty of the land. His navy blue cloak, embroidered with golden roses, billowed behind him as he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of duty press down on his shoulders. Hidden in the shadows of the forest, Naima watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. Her deep brown eyes were fixed on the prince, but not with admiration. No, hers was a gaze born of anger, resentment, and a desire for vengeance. She was part of Roselorn, the rebel faction that had long been oppressed by the crown. Dressed in rugged leather and dark green, she blended seamlessly into the thorny underbrush. Her bow was drawn, her fingers steady on the string as she aimed directly at the man who represented everything she hated, but something stopped her. As she watched him, his posture wasn't that of a tyrant. There was a sorrow in his stance, a vulnerability that caught her off guard. She hesitated. Why? Before she could decide, her fellow rebels launched their attack. The prince was taken captive, bound in ropes, and dragged into the depths of the forest. Naima found herself standing over him, the one responsible for guarding the very man she had sworn to despise. In the dim light of the rebels' hideout, the flickering torches cast deep shadows across Evander's face. His golden hair was disheveled, his royal attire tattered from the fight. Yet despite his situation, he held his head high, his blue eyes defiant. Naima's gaze met his, and for the first time, she saw him as more than just a prince. He was a man, weighed down by the same burdens she carried. Their conversations were sharp and venomous at first, filled with accusations and blame. But as the nights grew longer, and the isolation of the hideout pressed in on them, their words began to soften. One moonlit night, they found themselves alone in a small clearing outside the hideout. The moon bathed the forest in a soft glow, making the roses look less like threats and more like beacons of peace. Evander stood close to Naima, his golden hair illuminated by the silver light. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. Naima's heart fluttered. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "I can't. This is wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe what's wrong is the world we live in," Evander replied, his voice low and filled with emotion. For a moment, time stood still. The tension between them, once sharp and dangerous, had softened into something else, something undeniable. But the next morning, everything changed. Word arrived of a plot to assassinate the king, to plunge the entire kingdom into chaos. Evander's life and the future of Elaria hung in the balance. Naima was faced with an impossible choice: allow her people to claim their vengeance or save the man who had somehow captured her heart. In the grand throne room of the palace, where the final confrontation unfolded, Evander and Naima stood side by side. The tall pillars loomed above them, and the conspirators they faced were ready to see the kingdom fall. But Evander, now dressed in royal armor, was not afraid. He stood protectively in front of Naima, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His blue eyes were fierce, filled with determination, but they softened every time they glanced at her. Naima, dressed in her rugged rebel attire, her bow drawn and ready, stood with him, fierce and unyielding. Together they confronted the traitors, their bond now stronger than anything that sought to tear them apart. In the end, love triumphed. The plot was exposed, and the conspirators were defeated. With both factions in disarray, Evander made a bold decision. He would step down from the throne. He no longer sought power. Instead, he sought peace, not just for himself, but for the people he loved, including Naima. Together, Evander and Naima walked through the thornwood forest, their hands intertwined. The once dangerous thorns had dulled, and the roses bloomed brighter than ever before. Naima wore a flowing dress, her radiant curls catching the soft breeze. Evander's royal attire had become more casual, reflecting the peace he had finally found. As they walked, the sun broke through the trees, casting a golden light over them. In that moment, the love that had once seemed doomed to fail had finally blossomed into something pure, something beautiful. They had not only saved each other, they had saved their world.